I'll start reassembling the componentry now. My black paint is all ready to go and dry. So I'll start with putting the blade actuating ring in place. It only goes in one position. There's a pin on this surface, a small pin. That small pin connects up to the lever that swings it backwards and forwards. It only goes in one position on the mechanism plate, like that. We have the retainer. Again, that'll only go in one position. And we have 3 screws that hold the retainer plate to the mechanism plate. I happen to know that a short screw goes here. Two of these screws are short, one's longer. And of the 2 remaining positions, one of them takes the long screw, one takes the short screw, and I'm just looking through here. One of them runs through to a channel cut in here, so obviously that needs to be the short screw. So the short screw goes in there. As usual, I'm starting the screws, but I'm not doing them up tight until they're all in position. The long screw goes through here. I'll flip it over and check that I've got those in the correct positions. Yes, that's correct. So I can do those 3 screws up. And I'll check that the blade actuating ring can move freely backwards and forwards, and it can. I can flip this over. Here is where our lever fits, and in an ideal world I'd put a little bit of molybdenum on there, so I'll find that. I'll put a touch of molybdenum at the pivot and in the slot where the slot couples to that pin, and it just needs a touch, just enough to make the metal look dirty. We'll pop that in place and fit its screw. Get that up tight. Now hook the spring back over there and check that that's snappy in action. It is. That spring has certainly got an odd look to it. I think someone has adjusted it slightly. I may want to unadjust that. If anything, the adjustment has been done to make that stiffer in its action, and I don't know that it's particularly helpful. See if I can remove that spring. I've removed it, and I'm going to see if I can modify the shape of that slightly to my satisfaction. Now I'll see if I can reinstall it. Hook it into place. Yeah, I like the look of that a little bit better. I can't say there's an awful lot in it, but I prefer it to look as they normally look rather than in some imaginative shape that a previous repairer has left it. So here I want to do two things. I want to put a little bit of graphite powder in here and work that blade actuating ring backwards and forwards, and I want to put a bit of graphite powder, puff a bit of graphite powder into the retard gear train and work that backwards and forwards a number of times, and that's all the lubrication that that piece will require. So I will start on a piece of paper. I'll drop a little bit of graphite powder in here. Once I'm happy I've worked that in, basically it'll find its way into contacting surfaces. Then I can blow out any excess. That's good, and I'll do the same for the retard gear train. I'll hold back the pallets at this end with my thumb and move the arm backwards and forwards so that the gears are all meshing. Now I'll go and blow out any of excess graphite. We don't want loose graphite. Likewise, that can go off my paper. Now I should have the mechanism plate complete. Working smoothly. Ready to be reassembled. So I'll pop that to one side, because the next task I need to deal with is the shutter case. And the shutter case, of course, has the diaphragm assembled into it. Here we have the setting lever. This has the pointer on it for the aperture, which sits on the case in that direction. And I'm going to put a little bit of molybdenum on the inside of that surface, some on the flat surface at the back, and this requires very little. It's just it just puts a little bit of a dirty mark on there more than anything else. You don't require much at all. Make sure I get this in the right place. That's good. Pointer at the bottom of the shutter, and on the inside of the shutter, inside of the case, we want this piece, which will move the blades. Swing the ends of the blades in or out, and so we've got to get this in place. So I'll hold this up in place. I'll find a jig to put that on so that it stays there and you can see what I'm doing without the fat fingers in the way. This will probably do it. This is part of my setup for getting the diaphragm assembled anyway. Right, so we can pop our plate on. Our plates, the holes in this, the two holes for the screws are countersunk on the top to take the screw, so you have no difficulty deciding which way around that goes. We have our two screws that drop through here. It's just picked up the hole. Let's get the other one. Do those screws up. Don't over tighten those screws. They strip out with great ease, and that becomes a major nuisance. So there we have it. There's our setting lever in place. The top of the shutter is the one with the cutouts in it here and here. The lever should be at the bottom of the shutter. That's good. That's exactly what we want. Now we can have to assemble the diaphragm onto its plate. So I'm going to get my blades together here. And lay them out in an order, a useful order, so that I can pick them up and place them. As I said earlier, the rivets are not symmetrical in their placement. They're closer to the centre of the blade here and closer to the outer edge here. And I'm laying them out in that direction, and that'll become obvious why in a minute. Oh. The tweezers don't want to pick that one up. Its mates seem alright. That little rivet that forms the pivot there might be a little bit misshapen if my tweezers are popping off it. So I'll lay these all out in the same direction so that it's convenient to pick them up and use them. If you get one or more blades round the wrong way, you'll find that you end up with an aperture which is not entirely circular. So I'm looking closely to make sure that I do in fact have these all laid out the same way, and I do. That's good. Here's my assembly jig. Move that into the field of view a bit. So we take our retainer plate here. This only goes on one way. On one face of this there are 5 small recesses where the pivots, where the shutter blades pivot. That goes down on the jig. There should be a smooth flat plate on this side of the jig. And now I've got to lift all my blades carefully into place one by one. And it's usually useful to have a toothpick here to help me align those. The blades are just laid one over the top of the next, until you get back round to the start. When you discover that you have to fit the blades underneath the blades you've already put in place. I'm already getting in a mess here. It's better. If the blades are distorted because they had been covered in oil at some stage and had been forced, this process is much more difficult. This is the last blade I can put in without having to swing existing blades out of the way. Now, I have to pull this blade back out of the way to expose the next positions. Alright, that's the 3 holes exposed. Now I've got to place those blades in position. It's not exactly playing the game. These blades are not lying as flat as I would prefer them to lie. One last blade to go into place. Now I have to get these blades lifted back over the last blade we put down. And back in position. That's a good start. Now our case only goes on in one position. There are 3 screw holes on the back of the case. And on the inside of the case, likewise, there are 3 screw holes, 2 of them close together, 1 further apart. Now those 2 close together at this end. I have my lever set in the fully open position for the blades, and I am using the position of these alignment holes here relative to the position of the blade pins here and here close to those 2 screw holes to get my alignment correct. This is always a little bit fraught. I have to lower this over those pins on the blades without disturbing anything. Of course, I can't really see where I'm going. And get it wriggled into position so that those pins drop into the slots in that disc. Feels okay. Now I'm holding the shutter up in one hand, the case up, and I'm going to lift off the outer part of my jig and flip it underneath. The centre part of my jig is helping hold that mechanism, that plate down in place, the retainer plate. And I'm just making sure that my holes are all aligned. 3 screws hold this retainer plate to the outer case, and I very carefully run the first screw in, and I don't do it up tight. I just want it to make sure that that plate is located. I'll put the second one in. I'm just running that screw and I'm not pulling it up tight, I'm not putting any pressure on the plate at all. And I'll place the third. I've lifted off the centre part of my jig and I'm looking to see that the pins, the rivets on those blades, are all correctly seated in the retainer plate here. They are. I'm going to move my aperture setting lever here slightly and see if it appears that all the blades are being moved. In other words, that the hole is circular, no blades are being left behind. That all appears good. So I'm going to do up my 3 screws. Check the action again. It's smooth. There's a little bit of drag on here, it's not rattling loose. That's ideal, we don't need it to rattle loose, in fact that would be a disadvantage. I'm confident that my blades are clean, that there's no oil on them, so the drag is strictly between the lever here, that ring, and the case. And it's nice and smooth in action. We don't want the aperture setting to be disturbed very easily. I'll check those 3 screws. They're good. We're done with the diaphragm. That's finished. That's ready to be assembled. So we can go back to our mechanism plate. Now our mechanism plate's ready to assemble. So what I want to do now is unhook that spring, pull that lever out, this puts our blade actuating ring in the position it would be if the blades are fully open. And now I can fit the shutter blades, which have been cleaned. And I'll start at this position. Second blade goes there. Third blade goes there. Fourth blade goes there, and the fifth blade goes here. Now I've got my blades are all in position. Now I can carefully lower my case, the shutter case, back over there. I've got to align my screw holes. The two close together ones will go here and here. The one further apart is over here. So I want to get that aligned. Just checking that they're centered up fine. Keeping in mind that when I took apart the shutter, the mechanism plate did not want to fall out of the case easily. And when that happens, it's down to one of two things. There's either distortion on the case or the mechanism plate, typically the case, meaning that it's not completely round and that's why it's binding, or it's because oil was effectively gluing the two components together. In this case there didn't appear to be any distortion because I certainly didn't have to remove any distortion, and the mechanism plate seemed to go back in fine. Now we'll check the operation of the shutter. I'm swinging the lever in. It seems nice and smooth. I can put its return spring back in place. Give it a flick. Those blades move freely and smoothly. That's ideal. That's good. That's all that's wanted there. And I can start assembling the rest of the components to the mechanism plate. First I'll put just a little touch of molybdenum on two surfaces, on the lever there and on the point of the lever there. And I can start putting my componentry back in. It's handy if you put these back in the right order, of course, but it's not a complicated procedure. Where are we there? That spring needs to fit around there. This is the shoulder screw that's wanted at this point. If I recall correctly, that was quite hard to move previously. It had been done up very tight. Avoid doing up any of the fixing screws, particularly at a position like that with a shoulder screw. Avoid doing them up too tight, because what you'll do is you'll drive that shoulder on the screw down into the mechanism plate, and then it'll effectively crush or the lever it's holding, rather than allowing it to pivot easily at that point. And of course that's very counterproductive. A little bit of molybdenum, I'll just put a bit of molybdenum down the centre of that high-speed spring that sits over its post here. Might need to be able to tuck that in there, do I? Okay. Just got to wriggle this into position. I probably should have put that in first. I think we can do it this way. Yes. That did it. It's wriggled into position. This lever needs to go in next. Tiny spot of molybdenum paste in the centre. Get that seated over its post and tuck its spring in. As I drop that into place, it sits above that arm. No, it's on the wrong side of it. That's better. Spring does seem unusually enthusiastic. I don't think it's going to cause me any grief. This piece. This piece is the latch that holds the shutter in the cocked position, when it is cocked of course, and the post fits into a little hole in the mechanism plate. I'll get that screw started. I'll tuck its return spring down into place. That lever is sitting up at a funny angle. That's better. It's down in place. That's all working correctly. We have our shutter release lever. I'll put a bit of molybdenum paste in the recesses that run against these two levers and at the pivot. Yeah, that's allowed to drop over centre there. It doesn't really want to pick it back up again. We'll see how we get on. Oh, that'll be alright. That'll be okay. This piece needs to go in. This will modify the movement of that lever. This guide would form the cable release socket on an earlier type of shutter of this type. The cable release on this one, of course, having been moved to the camera body. And its fixing screw. Now I'm having to hold the shutter release depressed here so that the lever is pulled forward of the screw hole and I can get the screw in. Right, well that modified how far back this lever could go, which means that now it doesn't drop over centre and that the lever works nice and smoothly. So I'm checking all these screws because that's the last of the screws we need to be tightening up in here. We're not disturbing the retard gear train because I'm quite happy that that was working pretty well when we started, and it's unlikely that it's changed remarkably since. So a bit of molybdenum paste to our main lever. I'm interested in the inside surface where it runs around the centre post there, or the lens tube if you like, on the mechanism plate. This doesn't require much at all, it's just to make sure there's no high friction spots. Just making sure that I cover the areas on the bird head pull, where that peg rises, that's where that runs round this track here, and I just wanted to make sure that'll be smooth. This piece acts against the speed train here, the retard gear train, and likewise I needed to make sure that was smooth. On the retard gear train, the main lever acts against this point, so I want to make sure that that's slightly lubricated. Likewise this point here, and that also runs on the speed cam plate. That's ready. That's ready to be assembled. So I'll drop my main drive into place, pull back the pallets with my finger, make sure that the speed lever down there is all correctly out of the way, and hook the main drive spring back over its post here. Make sure everything else is looking good. Pull that catch back out of the way. That looks good. I should be able to cock the shutter there, and it should stay cocked. Make sure at this stage the shutter is cocked. Everything's sitting there nicely. I'm not going to fire it like that because it'll all fly to pieces again. Our speed cam. I want to put some molybdenum around the centre where this runs on the lens tube, just to make sure that that runs smoothly, and some on the cam surfaces here so that they'll run smoothly. And one spot that does need attention is in this slot. That's where the 500th of a second, the high speed spring, is compressed when this is rotated past that point, and so that wants a little bit of molybdenum too. All this is sitting there incorrectly in position. I can lower my speed cam into place, make sure that the B lever here is actually sitting correctly. It looks good. Set to B, the shutter works exactly as I'd expect it to. On 1 second, it's certainly giving a credible 1 second. On 1/10 of a second, should be about there. That seems good. And on 1/25 of a second, that seems quite good. Alright, that appears quite sound to me. I can check my speeds on my shutter tester, and I will do so, but I don't see there being any great problem there. So the cover plate for the front here now, that can go in place. It only goes on in one position. There's my lock notch over there, so it's got to go here. Rotate that until that screw matches the lock notch, and rotate that lock into position. It all seems pretty good to me. Yep, that certainly feels good. So, what else has to go back? Well, our pointer for the aperture settings needs to go back on here now. It's quite a snug fit, and I'll find its screw. I've got two small screws here. Are they in fact identical? No, I don't think they are. Let's pop the smaller of the two in here, because we're short one screw. I know I've got to find one. Here we go. And we have our Kodak nameplate and aperture setting ring here. When screws are missing from positions like this, one of the things you need to be aware of when you're hunting around for replacements is that if a replacement screw was too long, it may foul the mechanism underneath if it protrudes through too far. So be a bit cautious about selecting replacements. That looks good. I'm going to test this shutter for speed. I'm also going to find a screw for that missing screw hole, missing screw there, and then clean and fit the lenses. Well, I found a replacement screw. That's all been fitted. I noticed that the engravings here, particularly the speed engravings, the paint had been stripped out of them. Someone must have attacked it at some stage in the past with something a little bit aggressive in the way of a solvent when cleaning it. So I've refilled those numbers and letters so that the settings stand out more clearly. Now I've got to clean the lenses and pop them back.